stay with the world of politics. And just to remind you, Finance Minister Enoch Gondogwana says Treasury expects an average GDP growth of 1.6% over the next 3 years. Now, remember, of course, that is down from what was expected back in February, around 2.1 to 2.6%. And it all hinges on economic growth. It's the SOEs, it's ESKOM, it's the public sector wage bill. I can go on and on. The minister's speech coming at a time when consumers are struggling to keep up with the very high cost of living and simply put food on the table. So a couple of impediments, we're told, will continue to hamper South Africa's economic growth. And how do we get out of any of these? If you can tell me, that'll be great. Let's name them: power cuts, crime and corruption, the big ones, of course. Let's get reaction. I'm joined by Build One South Africa leader Mmusi Maimane, who got out of it. You got out of this mess and you've dragged yourself back in as well. We need to talk. I would love to get your thoughts on the terrorism in a moment and coalitions, but I would like to start, Mmusi, on the budget speech. Optimistic? How did you feel afterwards? Some are saying hit the right notes. Some are saying not enough detail. Where do you land on it?
I think it was a difficult balancing act. But I think more than anything, our biggest difficulty about this budget, and certainly where the government sits at the moment, is a lack of priority and a lack of support for citizens, particularly citizens who are making a living. I mean, I would have expected yesterday at least a signaling that said, could we give a tax cut for personal income tax? This way it will allow people to fight off high cost of living. Did we not focus sufficiently? I welcome the focus on ESKOM to stabilize the energy grid, because no economy can grow after that. But I thought this was a missed opportunity to be able to tell us that, fine, in the next 3 years the world would look like this, but in the next 5, this is what we hope to achieve. Because in truth, a growth of 1.9% in our global context does mean more and more people join the ranks of the unemployed.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is that unemployed rate, which is going up, and that's where a lot of the money is going to right now, whether it's the public sector wage bill. We know about the strikes that are ongoing. Quite rightly, there's demands for more money. I would like to pick up on the tax thing as well, because SARS having quite a good year. Their revenue and their collections jumping quite significantly as well. So you're saying off the back of that, maybe a tax reprieve. But the problem is, Mmusi, if you take a tax reprieve, we're going to have less money in the fiscus next year.
Well, what all that simply does is that it allows someone who is working hard, is supporting a family, because in truth, South Africans, there are many households who are dependent on remittances from people who are working. So if we support those people and help those people, money should not be going into a bloated state and a bloated administration that supports a few. Money should be going back to the hands of citizens so that they can economically participate. They've got spending and purchasing power. And more than anything, when you think about the long-term objective of trying to educate kids, trying to keep citizens safe, citizens are having to face off difficult times. We already are projecting an increase of inflation. And certainly as you pump up your car, you fill up with petrol, these are expenses that citizens are faced up to. And I would urge that this would help them. It will also help us for economic activity going forward, but also it means that around communities, there's better money supply.
I'm glad you mentioned economic activity as well, because very closely linked into that is ESKOM as well, and government seemingly picking up the majority of the tab. There doesn't seem to be an easy way out of the ESKOM issue. There's always going to be a bitter pill to swallow. What did you make of government taking on more of that debt?
Well, one of the things that was the sting in the tail of that benefit, because of course I've always been one to say let's be wary of bailouts of state-owned enterprises, but you can't deny the fact that we've got to keep the lights on. Where the sting came in is that it will be all dependent on the NERSA agreement, which we're still looking forward to, because consumers will have to pay for this one way or another. And wherever that rate hike is going to come at, whatever that point is, will add more pressure to consumers who are already starting to feel the pain. So I think we've got to think harder. We've got to think harder about how we diversify energy supply. I would have at least sought to put an investment fund that says, how do we help independent power producers? How do we diversify energy space? How do we ensure that these reserves that are in place are increased so that ESKOM can be able to keep the lights on? Because for every day we have a stage of load shedding, you can literally take a percentage of GDP off that over a long period of time. So I would have rather focused that investment in how we create public-private partnerships so that we can increase our our base load, as it were.
And what I find interesting as well is some critics picking up on the timing around the increase of the social relief of distress grant. Funny how that runs into 2024, of course, because what do we have in 2024? A national election as well. Where do you stand? Where does your party stand, Build One South Africa, on social relief grants like the 350 Rand? It's great for those who need it, of course, but even the finance minister saying it's going to be a toss-up. We can't keep doing this forever.
No, certainly. And I do think one of the difficulties about these things, particularly SRD grants, is that they can be used for political gain, clearly. But I certainly think South Africa needs to think hard about a basic income grant. I think that there are too many citizens who are poor. We're not creating jobs fast enough, and we must shield people from adverse poverty. So to me, the only debate that must be on the table is how do we keep that support, particularly for citizens who are poor and particularly young people who can't find work, giving them some sort of income support so that they can go find work and do all sorts of things like that. So a basic income grant is something I'm certainly supportive of. I think it shields the poor from adverse poverty. So post-2024, I think it'd be a conversation that we need to enter into as a country and how we support citizens in the lowest level.
Yeah, without the creation of jobs through entrepreneurship, etc., you can't employ those. Those who can't get employed need a grant of some kind because government is getting this wrong. That's the argument around this. I would like your thoughts before I let you go, though. Yeah. But we could talk politics all day,
sure.
Of course. But I want to get your thoughts on this U.S. Embassy warning, because Tumza had an interview with Helmut Heitman saying earlier, right now we should trust the U.S. government because our own government generally doesn't know how to handle this intelligence. And I say that prefacing the KZN looting of last year. What's your reaction to this and the fact we don't have anything concrete from our own government?
That's the biggest failure. A threat you should always take seriously. And citizens, and I want to thank the US government for alerting this matter. The only question that we should put on the table is, where's our president and where's our Minister of Intelligence? Right at this point, ought to be commanding the country to say, do not fear. Here are the actions that we've taken. Here's what the security measures is. For if anything was to happen, the blame shouldn't be at the US. The blame should be, where did our government do if they were warned that something of this nature is happening? So I'm frankly disappointed that we have a government that has failed to communicate accurately, timelessly, so that not everyone is panicking at any big gathering that is happening this weekend, wondering what is happening. I think it's unfair on business. It's unfair on the psyche of a nation that has already been through a lot, given July last year. I would have called right now, we need a command council that meets urgently around this matter and gives us direct communication as to here's what we know, here are the facts, here's what the intelligence that we've shared with the US is, and ultimately here are the security protocols that we've put in place.
Or at least a family meeting before we get to the weekend. How hard can that be?
Certainly, but it's communication. You serve the people of this country, and we need to be quite strong at being able to tell them what they can and cannot do this weekend.
Well, I appreciate you coming in to talk to us about your reaction to the budget speech, and there's a lot to go through, but good to hear from the leader of Build One South Africa, Mmusi Maimane, weighing in on that, and also the terrorist alert that's come out from the U.S. Embassy for Sandton, the greater Sandton area, this Saturday, even going as far as to say the 29th of October. I'm afraid there are no more details apart from that, just urging their staff to avoid crowded areas. But there's two problems there, of course. We know that there's a Soweto Derby. We know that there's a gay pride march planned for this weekend as well. As soon as we get more information, we'll bring it to you here on eNCA.